Oh, no, it's my whole belt.
Okay, we'll call to order this meeting of the legislative committee for the city of Salem for November 17th, 2023. President Hoy
Stapleton.
and looks like Phillips is absent. And we don't have our alternate here, but we do have one. So welcome everybody. We will just start right down the agenda with updates, information sharing, legislative updates. So it looks like our federal folks are not online, so we'll start with Justin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors, staff. Good to see everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to our November update. Just a couple quick things. I'll go through calendar, touch on the revenue forecast, talk about what leadership has in terms of priorities for this session, talk specifically about the 24 session, and then how we kind of navigate these next 3 months. So that being said, not a lot on the calendar. This is that time of year where Thanksgiving sneaks up on you, and then you got a few weeks to work before Christmas, and then boom, you're into the January and legislative session. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however people see it, January has really become kind of a race into that session. So it's very busy politically in terms of.
I'm sorry if I can interrupt you for 1 second. I see we have 4 notifications on Zoom there, Dan. I'm wondering if those are people waiting in the lobby. Just to make sure. Oh no, it's team chat or something. I don't know what that is. We don't do that. I don't think so.
No, it's old.
Yeah. Stuff. Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure we didn't have people waiting. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Mr. Mayor. As I was saying, calendar, so not a lot specifically. There will be a big run in January, political fundraising prior to the session. You cannot raise funds during the legislative session. So that ramp up is always right there. As everybody else knows, March 10th is the filing deadline. So these short sessions are extremely compressed and extremely political because people will then run on what comes out of that session in the primary, and then that carries into the general election. So the only official dates on the calendar are legislative days, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th. And there will probably be hearings around some of the legislation that's December. That's actually January, the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. All right, there's our calendar revenue forecast. Everybody probably saw that. You can go through that on your own, but a very stable forecast. Personal income tax collections, 4.3% above what forecast in September. Corporate income tax collections above what was forecasted in September, about 1.6%, 6.7 million. So there's just a couple highlights of that forecast. In that, looking at leadership priorities, we've all heard from the governor, housing production, obviously a big priority, addiction, crisis, and then childcare, and of course sheltering will continue to be going on, and then housing, as we're going to hear from folks in the room. So we know their priorities going into this thing. It doesn't mean it's narrowly focused to that. We do have some opportunities. So looking at the 24 session, what are our real priorities? As everybody knows, what in my role for the last 6 or 7 years, funding. We're trying to get that funding. We know we need that funding. We're trying to get that taken care of. One of those is welcome. One of those is payment in lieu of tax. So we've talked about that a little bit. I won't get into a lot of details now. I've had several meetings. I've met with the speaker twice. I've met with the governor's legislative director twice. I've met with our own Representative Anderson numerous times, too many to count. But I've also shared our intentions with Senator Wagner as well. So leadership on both sides of the building understands. The governor understands where we're coming from. I'm excited to delve in, during the holidays, we all get our reading lists going and start to delve into stuff. I always try to incorporate things that we're working on in February for my clients. I found this awesome little study from the Harvard Kennedy School, my alma mater, go Harvard, and economic value. It focuses on Trenton, New Jersey. Very similar city, relying on property taxes, capital city. And the nice thing about this study, as we're formulating our talking points, et cetera, is it doesn't just talk about the in lieu of taxes piece, which obviously is important to make up that revenue. It talks about the benefit of states actually investing in capital cities. And as we look through that and start to work on that, there are at least 9 other states that have payments in lieu of taxes. Connecticut, which is the highest, has about 45% property tax value in payment. Vermont, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Washington State, and we're still looking through some others. So I'm working on that now, Mr. Mayor and councilors.
The last time I looked at that, there were at least 17, and I
Yeah.
didn't get through the whole list, so.
Yeah, so the nice thing is we're gonna have the ability to show, not only does this help, and we're a capital city, we're the one providing fire, et cetera. Public safety, water, we already have that agreement with the state. We've got a defined capital district already, so it's going to be nice to say so many entities, so many capital cities share this burden with us, and we'd like to see how this goes forward in the future. So excited about pilot. Yes.
So you mentioned that you met with Anderson. Have you met with any of our other delegations?
Yes, of course. Senator Patterson, haven't talked much to Mannix Thatcher, those other folks. Ed Deal, gets a little chunk of our delegation, as well as Tracy Kramer, I believe. So we will have those conversations, but now I'm really hyper focused on leadership, so they know what we're coming with. We're also looking at just a separate one-time appropriation, so we'll keep that on the table as well, try to get as much as we can, because we all know there's a tremendous amount of need in our community. So those conversations going on right now. This West Side Rail, from Wilsonville, I've been attending some of those meetings on behalf of the Council of Governments. It's a study. I think they're asking for about $500,000. I think part of that would go to the COG to do some of that administration, which would be great. So I'm keeping tabs on that. Photo radar, I heard there's some kind of technical fix they need to do, so I'll get more information on that. We'll figure that out, but again, that shouldn't be too hard. And then finally, shelter funding. We all know we need operations funding, and we continue to fight for that. We've heard good news from the governor's office. We'll keep our fingers crossed there, and we know the league is also working on a big proposal.
What good news from the governor's office?
Well, that they're still working on dollars for sheltering as well statewide, and we know we're part of that. So I'm excited about that.
Okay, have we heard from our federal folks at all, or we just,
No,
apparently Councilor Phillips will be joining us momentarily online, so. And Councilor Nishioka texted me that she's on her way, but we're gonna tell her she's not being needed now.
okay, great. Good,
So we'll move on then.
we will. We're trying to have our federal folks show up just a little slower than anticipated.
No worries. We can always come back to that section of the agenda. So we'll go on to discussion, starting with housing and homelessness. Just one quick and just a little announcement. We had a great tour on Friday with Congresswoman Salinas. She had reached out to view a couple of our programs. So with Jessica and Nicole, we toured the Equine Hall, and also got our first look at Sequoia Crossings, which was really exciting. So we were able to show her some of those programs, talked about some of the challenges that we're having, especially with the supply chain, again, with electrical connections for Sequoia Crossings. That's been a huge challenge again. So she was really interested in that. We talked to her also about the issue with RAD funding that we've been talking about for the last several months, and that I talked about when I went to DC. So she was interested again in that. What else did we talk to her about on the specific things? I think those are the two big ones.
Yeah.
So that's just a quick update. Do we want to turn it over to Jessica to talk about, or do you want to lead us
Well,
off?
I just want to say, Jessica got selected for a rulemaking advisory committee related to housing production, which is a big coup. So
Yay.
yay, thank you, Jessica. And we wanted to we grouped these two things together as a way to give you general updates about what we're seeing and hearing in some of the rulemaking advisory work. And then Eunice is also really engaged in the housing production rulemaking stuff. So do you all want to just give, and could you mention the Orchard Park 5 million need? And then we could just keep. So this is mostly updates until we get towards the Measure 110 conversation, which I hope is a broader engaged.
So the visit with Congresswoman Salinas was great. Their office has already reached back out to us to get some deeper understanding of the concepts that we discussed, such as the lack of supportive housing or supportive service funding for operations. And so really getting a good picture of what that is and getting those relayed back to the DC folks, which was really helpful. We are and have reapplied for rehabilitation funding for Orchard Park. The application was submitted. However, we're concerned that there is a possibility that will be denied for the third time. And so one of the surefire ways that we can ensure we meet the specific definition outlined by OHCS that puts us in that priority award order number 1 is that the housing authority commit $5 million in resources to Orchard Park. Well, the housing authority does not have $5 million sitting around. And so the ask has been that in consideration of preservation and the push for additional preservation funds for the state so that we could equally support both the production side and the preservation side, we could, if there was a $5 million investment to the housing authority, ensure our first priority and begin the work of renovation that building critically needs. The fire building is almost complete. Those 21 units will be online this winter, which is great. But the rest of the building still has substantial deferred maintenance. And our concern is that if we continue to let this go without funding it right away, well, we could have a worse problem a few years from now. So that's something that our hope is that we can get the word out there that if we can get that dedicated funding, we can get that first priority.
So Jessica, I'm confused because we did a lot of work on this a few months ago and I felt like we were over the hurdles with OHCS and now suddenly there's another hurdle. Was that an anticipated hurdle or?
Anticipated hurdle.
It was, okay.
It's an anticipated hurdle that when they review the applications that potentially there's still room for them to say no. And this is our backup plan in hopes that if we can secure these resources, there isn't that ability to say no again. One of the current application is contingent upon the ability of the housing authority to award 25% of the project's rental assistance through project-based vouchering. Well, we know our voucher program is strained. We have actually done a really good job of getting our vouchers out. So we're hitting our utilization mark. So to say that we will have 56 available project-based vouchers in January is very hard to say right now. We will apply for them, but essentially that also requires public comment because we'd be taking it away from the tenant-based program. So essentially removing 56 vouchers from that program. And so, you know, there's still room for them to come back and say no. And so our concern is that if we can get the 5 million in allocated resources, there's no room to say no. We meet that criteria and we can move forward.
And is this the they in this situation? Is that OHCS in general or the Housing Preservation Committee?
It's OHCS in general, and the way that their qualified allocation plan says that the priority of funding is X. And it's a very difficult threshold to meet. And it requires the housing authority put out either 25% of the project in project-based voucher rental assistance or 5 million in local resources.
The announcement that I saw recently that from some additional congressional money to housing authorities around the state, including a few $100,000 to ours, would that money be available for this project or no?
We talked about congressionally direct spending as well. We will have the opportunity to apply for it in February, but we only have the opportunity of getting this application in on October 27th. So unfortunately, the timing doesn't align.
So that wasn't the one I was thinking of. The one, it was just announced that we actually got an award of, I think, I don't know, $600,000. It's on the paper a couple of days ago. And like Marion County Housing Authority got more than that. I didn't know
That
for
could
that.
be for our voucher program. I'd have to look into that specifically, but it doesn't have anything to do with this particular.
We couldn't use it for this project.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and then again, as far as the housing production work, we've provided our feedback to the governor's office with the draft framework housing production proposal. They have assigned it as legislative concept 19, LC 19 now. And so the draft framework is getting pretty close to being an undraft, and we're excited with some of the opportunities that will present.
Can I ask you a question about the previous slide?
Yes.
So you were talking about taking vouchers from one area to another area, but we are already utilizing most of our vouchers, if I'm correct. So what they're saying is we would have to take away actual people's vouchers.
No, we would have to have, the housing authority would have to have 56 available vouchers to project base. And right now, we don't, we could get them, but the process is, the public would have a say so because we would essentially be removing these vouchers from our tenant-based program and assigning them all to one property for which they would have to get on a new waiting list for. So we'd be trading them from one program to the other. And we don't know if that's the right thing to do. And so, but that's what OHCS requires us to do in order to meet this definition.
So tenant-based means that the person gets the voucher and they can take it wherever they can find a place to live. And the voucher is just, no, you have to live at this place, and whoever gets accepted there gets the voucher.
Right. So it's not really in line with our mission and what we want to do, but we also know that preserving this project is extremely important for the city. And so it's this, what do? So we would prefer for the state to provide us the resources that we can meet that definition and we can preserve this project finally and move forward with the rehabilitation.
Who are you working with at the state in order to get that all rolling?
So we've applied and it will go through its whole evaluation process. So it will go through its review threshold.
Yes.
Is this the thing that we've already failed a couple times?
Twice.
And so what changed for us to put it in again?
They said this is the last time this funding will be available until potentially 2025. And if we don't get the funding now, the project will not qualify to stay at 60% AMI. It will have to revert to 80% AMI and we will have lost it in the deeper for.
Is there anything that we can do to help?
It's really tricky. These resources are all oversubscribed, so it's really hard to, it's a hard fix.
Your support in general, any letters of support we could send, any type of letters of support for any of the represented. I met with Senator Thatcher and Representative Kramer both because this is in their district and I wanted to put this on their radar. We do know there may be some resources available for housing this session. Our hope is that we can put this in the bucket, like, please, we need help. We want to ensure this project moves forward.
So we need to engage Justin in that conversation as well. Justin, if you can maybe start engaging with those guys on this as well. Yeah, we had engaged with Senator Patterson and others before thinking this, anyway, but we need to engage with.
Yeah, I started the relationship building. That was my initial. Justin felt like that would be really good for me just to give them a background on the housing authority and what we do. They are aware that I'm gonna bring Justin back if we're ready for the ask, if that's how we want to pursue it.
Yeah,
Great. It's in line with the governor's priorities. I mean,
right.
It should be something, especially from the lose opportunity. That's where we really need.
And if you could draft a letter, Courtney or Jessica, for me to sign to.
Super easy to do with all of the great log of last efforts to fix this problem, so
Great.
easy to do.
If we lose this round, when will we know if we lose this round? And is it, I mean, how does that sync up with short session and hopefully getting funding through there? Does that make sense?
Yes, so I believe the awards, I'll have to go back and look at the exact dates. They don't really publish them, but typically it's about 3 months after the application. So October, November, December, January. So it lines up perfectly with the short session of getting the word out there before.
E-board, I mean,
Right.
there are a lot more options so it
Okay.
would be better to go through the application, but if that fails, we can also just lobby direct.
Especially since we've already had the governor's office and others involved in this preservation project. I know that they'll be eager to make sure to see it through the end. So.
And if I can, Mr. Mayor, I'm getting my next round of meetings are with co-chairs. So
Yeah.
if I can mention this at the tail end of other issues that I'm talking to them about, that'd be
The
great.
housing preservation.
So I'll just work with Jessica on that.
Awesome. Yeah, very important area of our city. I think,
And easy win,
right.
fast, not
Okay.
building new.
Anything else on housing and homelessness?
Do you want to say anything about the housing production comments that we've been providing,
Yeah.
how that's evolving?
Sure. So like Jessica mentioned, the governor's office is putting together that LC on housing production. And so that framework is constantly being revised, so they continue to give us new drafts, we respond. It has everything to do with UGB expansions, our adjustment land use process, and financing and funding for both infrastructure, site acquisition readiness, and actual housing. My understanding, talking to the governor's office, is that there's gonna be maybe 2 more rounds, so we'll get input, and then the bill will be drafted in January. So we will keep on that. One of the things they've been asking cities in the League of Oregon Cities is to look at what projects related to housing need and infrastructure improvement and potentially could get funding through that. So we've been working on coming up with a list of infrastructure projects that would directly support housing that we could submit.
And we're looking at different classifications of
Yep.
projects. So we could, right, we could feature specific things that are whole housing developments, which would not necessarily match all of our types of needs. Sometimes we have little projects, right, that just need a little push, and that might be easier sell when you consider the rest of Oregon's cities and what kind of a program to develop. So we're gonna go high and mid and low for types of projects.
Okay. Anything else on housing and homelessness?
There's so much, but I think that's good to know.
All right.
So the next thing that we have is local revenue options, and this is just a reminder for everyone that we are conscious of these issues and pushing these issues. You heard an update on payment in lieu already. For property tax reform, measures 5 and 15, Mayor Hoy, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the activity that you're engaged with?
Sure. I've convened a group of mayors of the 7 largest cities other than Portland. And we're having chats about pushing some sort of tax reform. There are lots of different efforts going on. So this would just be another group with another voice to push it, trying to have some sort of reform. And so yeah, so we had a great meeting. We had hosted here in Salem, and looking forward to that group kind of bringing their collective energy together. So yeah.
Cool, thank you. Just so you know, there's a lot of behind the scenes chaos going on right now as we're trying to figure out why the links aren't working for our federal partners, so.
And also Councilor Phillips is trying to get in.
Yeah, so we're
trying everything
we're
we
not
can.
sure what's going on.
No
but we're
worries. We're just
trying
gonna keep going
all
forward.
options to get this going,
We're
lots of
live.
communication.
It looks like we're live on YouTube, so that's the important part.
Exactly.
So
And we can catch up.
Let's just mute it.
Awesome, okay, there's Mark.
oh, here comes Mark.
Hey, there's Mark.
All right, so we're at measure 110. We can stop here and hear from,
Mark's joining.
We don't have anything in addition on payment in lieu of taxes, was already discussed.
Other than what Justin talked
Okay.
about.
I just want to make sure there's nothing else. Thank you.
so the other things that we want to mention were the WES update, and I think we just talked about that, is live again for this session, so we're monitoring. And then we can move into the federal side of things. Mark, are you good?
I think so. I'm here now.
Excellent, welcome, thanks.
Sorry for our technical challenges today, Mark.
No worries. No worries. I think my colleagues will also be joining in there. We're experiencing the same thing.
Just in terms of where we are on the agenda, Mark, we've covered a lot of the state issues and we're moving into about what is currently labeled 3E. We'll come back to measure 110 after we get just sort of a
Okay.
briefing and an update on the federal grants and this potential issue around broadband, which Ryan is also here to support. So do you want to just walk through a couple of updates and then we can go back to measure 110 and have a broader conversation? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, sorry for coming in here somewhat throwing off my game here after the technical problems. You have some very snazzy hold music on that Zoom call-in line.
Dan,
Which
you
would
can
be-
just call him a little bit.
So what's been happening recently here in Congress has been it's been interesting times.
I think you use the other one.
There's been a lot a lot has happened, but it hasn't necessarily
Right.
been,
No.
there's been a lot of activity, but not necessarily a lot of kind of outcomes that have really kind of happened recently in Congress. Are you all hearing me or?
Yeah, you're good. Sorry.
Okay.
There now, thank you.
No worries. I was just seeing some activity. So after the previous CR, I see my colleagues joining us here slowly. After the previous CR happened about a month and a half ago, and the speaker McCarthy was deposed. Basically, all the time since then was dealt with selecting a new speaker, which took a lot longer, I think, than many people were thinking, and then immediately turning around and trying to work on another CR, because the initial thought process, obviously, right, you do a CR for 45 days, you then use those 45 days to actually figure out how to fund the government long term, and you do that. There wasn't really time built in there for also spending like 3.5 weeks selecting a brand new, getting rid of and then selecting a new speaker. So everything turned immediately to let's figure out how to do another continuing resolution so we can actually focus with a new speaker, a new leadership team in the House on trying to actually fund the government long term. That went on for quite a while. The House did kind of two parallel paths there. They both began or continued moving their individual appropriations bills, the 12 bills that fund the federal government, continued to move those individually through, which would have funded them for the entire rest of the fiscal year, while trying at the same time to figure out what they could do to extend the deadline on when the government would basically shut down. That kind of came to a head this last week. The new speaker reached the conclusion that there was not basically a path forward that he could do with all Republican votes. He would need to do something with a substantial number of Democratic votes in order to actually fund the government. That was voted on earlier this week. Kind of around the same time as two different bills, the Transportation, Housing, Urban Development Appropriations Bill and the Commerce Justice Appropriations Bill. It was basically they attempted to bring those to the floor on a couple of occasions, and the term basically did not have the votes in the House in order to pass those pieces of legislation. So they did what it was a new thing for me, and I've been doing this for more than 25 years, a laddered continuing resolution, which is basically splitting the 12 bills into two different kind of tranches, and they extended it for a third of the bills, for 4 of them, into kind of mid-late January, and the remaining 8 bills extending those into early February. I haven't heard a good explanation for why that was better than doing them all to the same point in time, but that was the direction they chose to go. They went with a clean continuing resolution for all 12 bills. So no additional policy writers, no change in funding levels, nothing like that, just straight up at FY 23 levels. And that managed to pass the House. There were 93 Republicans voting against. And it passed in the Senate as well. So that's the current kind of timetable that we're on. The current speaker seemed to feel it was very important that the CR not expire before Christmas, because that had been kind of the normal way that Congress has operated in recent years. I wouldn't say it's a good way, but it's been the normal way of extending the government a few times and having everything kind of expire right before the holidays, which he felt had led to kind of rush deals, and not that were basically not helpful to the Republican Party in those deals. So that's kind of what we're on right now. And I know leadership now on the appropriations committees on both the House and the Senate side are working towards trying to come up with what a bill might be. And it has to be one that not only can pass the House, which again, there are 4 bills that they have tried to bring multiple times, they just cannot pass in the House the way they've been doing it right now, but also can be passed by the Senate and will be signed into law by the president. If they are able to do this through passing appropriations bill rather than a long-term CR, the earmark for the city of Salem for terminal improvements, all expectations are that will be included in whatever kind of the package is that ends up going through there. Terry, do you have anything else to add on the approach side of things?
No, Mark, I think that you covered that all precisely correctly. We are now just sort of in a holding pattern while they sort out what happens going forward.
There are a couple of things that also kind of expired. They were either linked in with the CR before or were extended right around the same point in time. One of those was the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration extension. The authorization on that had been extended to expire at the end of the year, and they've taken steps they're taking steps in order to extend that as well.
Yeah, they have not yet handled that. It was handled in the first continuing resolution, extending it from October to December 31st. It now is set to expire December 31st, and they have not yet moved anything new. The FAA and the airlines consistently push against short-term reauthorizations or continuing resolutions because it makes their scheduling very difficult, just the way that they do those things. And so they typically push for a minimum of a 6-month extension. So we'll see where things stand currently. The House has passed their bill and is ready to negotiate with the Senate. The Senate was on the verge of passing a bill. They actually had to cancel their committee markup about 45 minutes before it began, as Senator Sinema of Arizona kind of torpedoed it right before the meeting. And they have since, for the past probably 2 to 3 months, they have been negotiating amongst themselves in private without any sort of understanding from the outside of what's going on. I actually was in the committee offices earlier this week talking with the professional staff there. They are as frustrated as everyone else and wishing that this would move. They seem hopeful that they will, quote, eventually get a bill, but they do not know if they're going to make that happen in the next couple of weeks to be able to make it for the deadline. Even if they were to get an agreement within themselves in the Senate today, it would be virtually impossible for them to pass a bill and then negotiate with the House and then include that final bill before the 31st of December. So I think we're probably looking at an extension of current law, likely through June would be my guess, but we'll have to see what they decide upon.
All right. Anything else for us from the federal side?
Do you all want to address the Safe Streets application cycle and funding announcement cycle?
Absolutely. So the city of Salem applied for a grant through the Safe Streets and Routes for All program. The USDOT did a grant announcement on awarding a bunch of funding for recipients of that grant, but they also said that was only half of the recipients. They're going to do that in 2 tranches, and the second, I think, a larger tranche would be happening, later this year, before the end of this calendar year. So, from everything we understand in that, even though we were not included in the first round of grant announcements out there, we're still very much alive for the second round, and we're kind of waiting to see when that announcement is going to happen.
What were the nature of the projects in the first round? Was there like an obvious grouping or?
Not necessarily. They seem to be much smaller, and none of them were for actual kind of construction, which in some way I think is a good thing for. They were all basically planning grants. Is a good thing because the Salem one had some planning elements, but also had construction elements as well. So if I were looking at it, I would kind of naturally put us in that second tranche.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And so then the only other thing I would just add is that we're working now on the congressionally directed spending requests that we're planning to submit in March-ish. That always comes up so quickly. And some of the things that we're considering are another round for the airport terminal. And we're also looking at something that we're affectionately referring to as boardwalks for beavers, which may be a misnomer, but it's certainly catchy. And we, with Rob and our engineering group, we are engaging some students to think about the challenge that we're faced with in Minto and the water levels and what kind of structure and blah. So we're going to advance that further in between times. And then we're also looking at COPS grants. Yes. Would you like to remember out loud National Ballistic?
NIBIN.
Neighbors.
No, NIBIN, it's national. So it's ballistic, it's basically a forensic tool for intelligence. We can link that to everybody else through ATF.
Yes. and I cannot remember what NIBIN
I
means.
forgot it yesterday and I remembering it today.
Perfect.
National and ballistics are two of the four.
Those are I don't know the other ones, information network.
Yeah,
There you go.
Excellent. We should play like, name that acronym kind of game. That would be really fun.
Do we want to talk about the NOAA grant for the upper and lower Bennett dams?
We certainly can. That was on the council's agenda for Monday night, so we are moving forward with the application. I don't know if you all have any additional information about that, or Jason?
I just got confirmation that it's been submitted. We have a confirmation email, so once it's off or once it's validated, it'll be sent to NOAA for scoring.
And it's about fish passage. One of the dam, the focus is for whatever. One of the purposes of the grant for one of the two is about fish
There's
passage.
two parts of the project. One is replacement of upgraded dam, and the second is the replacement of an upgraded fish passage at Lower Bend.
Thank you.
So, do you guys have much experience with NOAA grants?
I've a little bit. I've had a couple clients who have gone after them in the past. It's an interesting agency to try and work with. It's predominantly scientists, and some traditional lobbying methods they don't appreciate. Some agencies.
They're impervious to your. That's awesome. Those non-political political people.
I would just like to say that I was a little bit surprised that we were that far along with that grant application. So I don't know whether we've secured any letters of support from our delegation for that grant. And that's a really good and advisable thing to be doing as we're applying. So if maybe not these folks, but certainly the delegation could be helpful. So Jason, I don't know if you could help me with that. We should connect on that. So we'll get coordinated and you guys can help us secure those letters.
Yeah, internally, just
Absolutely.
remember staff that when we're going after some sort of federal grant, we have advocates on our side. They're the three folks on the screen right there, and they can help us be better, more competitive in our process by securing advocacy letters and other advice. So it's important to get them all involved early and often, especially early.
Thank you. Any other questions about what we're doing federally? I know we're also preparing for another visit in January again. So any other questions about the federal work we're doing? Do you have anything else you guys want to add?
Broadband,
Though, yeah.
we need to talk about broadband. You have a handout labeled HR 3557, the American Broadband Act of 2023.
Yes. So I don't know if you all want to weigh in first or if you want staff to share what we have. We know that Natoa is involved and interested in this as well. How do you guys want to cover this discussion topic?
Why don't you all kick things off and then we can kind of fill in behind.
Perfect.
Sure. So HR 3557, so just real briefly, May 23, the House Commerce Committee approved on a party line vote the American Broadband Act of 2023. So that purports to streamline federal, state, and local permitting and regulatory reviews to expedite the deployment of communication facilities. The scary part there is streamline and expedite. And so you have a handout there. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the general impact is that this severely impacts or preempts local government in terms of right-of-way management, compensation, permitting, land use, and cable franchise authority. So there's a number of points there.
We don't like the word preemption ever.
No, we don't.
It takes away our authority.
So the letter that's attached to that front page is a letter that was submitted back in September. National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Association of Counties, and NATO, which is the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors. It's a mouthful. This is a letter that was addressed to the House leaders in our opposition or their opposition to this bill. as it's been described to me, it's unfixable, it just needs to go away. Some of the proposed responses, so first of all, I don't think there's any council action on this. Our legislative priorities already cover opposing any of these types of actions. The League of Oregon Cities is drafting a letter probably very similar to what we have attached here, and we're asking cities to sign on to that. There's also the suggestion, so as an example, Representative Lori Chavez Beamer, if I'm saying that right, Oregon's 5th District, Congressional District. She's a former city mayor, and so may be understanding of these types of issues, and so reaching out to someone like that. She was on the list of former mayors that may be sympathetic.
I mean, just from my work on this committee, like, holy crap,
Yes,
that's what I have to say about this.
yes.
So
Crazy.
So I think in terms of posturing for the city, our existing policy statements give us space, once approved, to advance the city's position by signing on to some of the larger efforts. And so we just want you to be aware that we are tracking these issues and so that everybody knows.
You have any questions, comments about this topic?
No, I mean, this is something that's been hanging out there for a while in terms of, I mean, it's come up and it's been a priority for a number of my clients, county clients or city clients or entities like that kind of over the years. It's kind of taken slightly different forms here and there. I think it's an important one this is larger than just the city of Salem. Obviously, this is public governments all across the country are gonna be banding together to try and fight against this. I think it's important to have this on your list of priorities. I think it's worth reaching out to the delegation and notifying them and letting them know your concerns. Just because it's passed out of committee doesn't mean it's happening either. I'll put out there. I mean, the House is very dysfunctional right now, and we just kind of went through our rigmarole to fund the government for 45 days, which cost us the Speaker of the House. And so even though, I mean, I've seen stuff in some of the materials that have been around there, like this could come to the floor of the House at any time. Yes, technically that is true, but the danger of this suddenly becoming law is, I think, maybe slightly overstated in that. And I think, yeah, probably the best steps for the city are to just reach out to our delegation and let them know of your concerns and why it is you're concerned about this.
So do you think just drafting a letter would be the best approach at this point?
I think so, yeah. And then if you send that to, I mean, if you all draft a letter, put it with us, we can then use that to reach out and just let them know, hey, this is something the city is concerned about. They're probably receiving letters from others as well, other cities, but we shouldn't assume that's happening. We should, I think, just let them know. Just give them the ammunition that they may need in order to vote against this bill.
Okay, we can do that.
What would a letter like? Is that just from you or?
Generally, I sign those on behalf of that.
And
For the record, I support that.
we put them on city letterhead, and we have, we're assuming that policy statements represent the position on this issue, and we've had the same statement for several years.
As a brief tenure as chair of the local appeal regulatory committee, this is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we already have policy that.
We do.
Yes, okay.
Yep.
And we are members of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, so that's in a sense, we've signed on to that group, but I think we need to do our own letters to our delegation for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're going to switch topics to Measure 110. You guys can hang out as you wish.
And so we also have a little bit about recreational immunity, but I don't want to go there if we don't have to do today, because we already have a statement about that. So as you know, on Monday evening, the city council had a great conversation, a beginning conversation about Measure 110. And so what we wanted to do today was to offer you everything that we think we've heard and are aware of that is happening about Measure 110. I think when I emailed these materials from the LOC, OICP, two more that I don't recall, and the district attorneys, I think.
District attorneys, sheriffs, cities, and the chiefs of police have signed off on this one proposal.
Yes. And I also, I think, mentioned that in conversations with the what we call Oregon 7 or 7, which is Eugene, Medford, Beaverton, Gresham, Hillsborough, Bend, and Salem. Most of the other cities are waiting and watching to see what materializes before they are jumping into the fray just yet. And so I just wanted you to have all of that context and then invite you all to talk about how or where you might want to position the city to participate or any number of options. And as we do that, I just want to share that Councilor Hoy did write in and offered this for your consideration. I'm requesting that our Council Legislative Committee, 1, vocalize repealing Measure 110, 2, recriminalize all uses of hard drugs, 3, but continue to fund appropriate levels of addiction treatment services and facilities. So that is her interest in moving this conversation forward. And then you have all the other resources that we have available to us. And the question is, how would you like to recommend the council proceed? Because we would be taking your input and then adjusting the legislative policy statements for hopefully the 7th. Yes, the city council meeting of the 7th, or maybe if we could, even November 27th.
Great. So typically how our statements don't typically get super specific. They're more general. So we have the flexibility to advocate the position, but yet not so narrowly that that locks us out of things. So in my mind, so a statement about reform of Measure 110 or something of that nature, what I think would be really helpful. I really like the approach that the DAs, the sheriffs, the chiefs, and the League of Oregon Cities is taking. It makes a lot of sense, but I know that this proposal is probably going to shift as as we get closer to the session and as people start weighing in. So, Justin, do you have any thoughts on what approach?
No, I mean, I think, well, yes, I mean, I think this is not uncommon, right? You get the initiative process, it's a low bar to get on, and you oftentimes end up getting a bunch of unintended consequences. So it usually takes a second or so to work that through. So I think our positions, and obviously in terms of collaboration, these are good partners, and probably makes sense for us to have a policy framework. How far out front or how far behind, I think that's something we'll work on over the next couple months.
And what level of specificity we want to provide in terms of the city's position.
I will say that I'm not okay with repeal, but I am really okay with reform. I think there needs to be reform. And of course, I am all in on treatment, and all the treatment we can get out there, the better, as far as mental health, behavioral health, addiction services, which are primarily done through the county. I would like to see a real investment in that, an investment that our community can see, touch, feel, and experience, not just an idea out there that we're somewhat doing something, but we're really not.
So my thoughts, first of all, I do appreciate the materials and policy recommendations as submitted by this trio, quartet actually. What I would notice is 3 out of the 4 entities are all law enforcement agencies. So they bring their law enforcement lens to the conversation. I'd be curious to know what policy recommendations there are from our partners in the treatment and addiction services community. I would at least like to know, surely they are putting out policy recommendations, excuse me, sorry about that. Surely they're putting out policy recommendations. These are DAs and law enforcement officers who are providing the kind of granular specificity that makes sense because it's within their wheelhouse. But I would be curious to see what other entities whose focus is on treatment and mental illness, what modifications are they recommending to Measure 110? And can we look at those as part of our own process? I think that would be helpful. More information is always helpful to me. I also am leaning towards reform rather than outright appeal. Policy proposal number 5 on here looks very similar to what I had suggested, my council remarks a couple weeks ago, which is to create an A misdemeanor for public use of controlled substance to align with current law prohibiting public use of alcohol and marijuana. My thought is I would like to see these drugs treated the same way as other substances are treated. So we have clarity that why should you be able to why should you be able to smoke meth on a street corner but not open a beer? That makes no sense to me. And I think in talking to my constituents, a lot of folks, that resonates with people. It seems fair. It seems we're treating all substances the same. But what I also like about policy 5 is that it allows for state funding of both treatment and supervision costs. So I find that helpful also. There are several policies on here. I don't know if we have time to really go over all of them. The ones that most interested me was policies numbers 1, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Because a lot of them are more about addiction treatment. For example, policy 9, create adequate stabilization, detoxification, and treatment capacity. Wouldn't that be nice? That'd be great. Wouldn't that be nice? Policy 10, support the establishment of an opioid overdose quick response team. Wonderful idea. You can save lives. Policy 11, I would be curious to know what Shaw thinks of this, and I don't know if you've had time to really read it, but it asks for aligning the siting of residential and secure facilities with the requirement of the Fair Housing Act. So is that a good thing? Does that create even more barriers? I don't know. That seems more of a technical question. So I'm on the fence on policy 11 because I don't know whether it has unintended consequences. I just don't have that level of expertise. But I'm generally aligned with Virginia on this one. Let's emphasize, I would love if we do come out with a policy statement, can we lean into addiction and treatment, alternatives to throwing people in jail? And some of these policies really speak to that. For example, sorry, it's double-sided. Number 1 says, under policy number 1, an A misdemeanor with diversion will compel those struggling with addiction to enter treatment without turning to an approach that focuses on incarceration. That sounds awesome to me. I would love us to not treat addiction as a crime whenever possible. So anyway, I need more time to process these. I was reading them as I was listening. I was trying to do both things at once. But those are my initial reactions. Thank you.
So from what I'm hearing, and I think it's kind of consistent with the conversation we had last meeting, is basically we would want some sort of statement that says, and I'm just trying to summarize what I'm hearing, basically a statement that says, we support efforts to reform Measure 110 that maintain and enhance opportunities for treatment while, and we need some sort of statement in there about public use of substances, you know, rolling that back. So it's just some sort of policy statement that's more high level. We don't want to get real deep on the detail on a policy statement, but yet has the, I think it's good to mention something about treatment, good to mention something about public use of substances, you know, so keep it high level, but yet get those, at least those 2 priorities in there. And I don't think I heard any others that, you know, we're not interested in recriminalizing in terms of putting people in, you know, recriminalizing addiction, but yet having policies that support removing the chaos that's on our streets these days. Did you have another thought?
No, I mean, I think that the tenor of what's been already discussed is where I am as well. I mean, I'm adamantly opposed to repealing Measure 110. I'm aware that the polls have kind of flipped, but this passed with 58% of the vote. And I think there's a reason for that. You know, nothing happens in isolation. The problem is that I and I think other healthcare providers have is that the funding was tied to action at the state legislative level, which has been so dysfunctional for the past couple of years. So the funding for the actual healthcare treatment, addiction treatment has been delayed. So how do we overcome that, you know, roadblock? I do think that when and where we can create simplicity and, you know, trying to treat this more similar to alcohol as well as marijuana in terms of addiction, that makes sense. I just don't want to support a policy that in effect gets us back to a pre-110 time in terms of like criminalizing this. I also agree that like people don't have a right to do drugs in public. Like, I just think that's not cool. Like, it's not cool to drink and be, you know, publicly intoxicated. So I don't want to create an unintended consequence with this. Because I support the aspirational goals built into 110. This needs to be treated in the healthcare model, but we just need the actual funding and mechanisms to do that. I would be very interested to like hear as well, like what do more high level addiction, you know, service providers. I mean, I overlap with that field, but that's not specifically my specialty, although I'm probably pretty knowledgeable. I'd be very curious to hear, like, you know, I believe in the news, I read that the state legislators who went to what's it called, Portugal, had some, you know, thoughts on this, because Portugal's, I don't know if anybody in the room understands, but Portugal decriminalized drugs in about 2000. So they're 23 years ahead of us, and they're dealing with similar problems that we're facing. And the takeaway from the people who went to that trip was reform is the answer, not repeal. Because, you know, the war on drugs, like, you know, I absolutely support police and our first responders, but like, that's a war on our brothers and sisters. That's a war on our parents, on our kids. Like, it's not a war on drugs. Like, it's a war on the people who use drugs. So like, that model doesn't work. And so I support reform very much so, but I don't want to do something that in effect like undoes Measure 110.
Do you feel like you have a sense of what we're looking for in a policy statement?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you all like to forward it to council at the next earliest meeting, or would you like to reconvene as a legislative committee, approve the statement that we draft, and then take it to council?
Timing wise, Justin, do you need this sooner rather than later?
I think we've got a little time on it. Plus, I think we also need to find our fit in terms of collaboration, who we're gonna work with to be in the policy statement. So I think we got a little bit of time to get it right. And I think the key is really getting it right.
Yeah.
And what really resonates with people, and that's, you know, people, including elected officials. Everybody has family members or knows people that are in serious situations. Everybody knows the true intent of what Measure 110 was trying to get at. But the questions of how do we fund it, how do we do this? We know it's a priority of the governor's, right? So we got to find our fit. So I think we take a little bit of time in getting this statement.
So Courtney, why don't you bring back a draft statement for us and have this committee reconvene before we send it to the full council?
And at the risk of being too granular, I did see in the news that it would be potentially helpful to have the right for law, like in first responders, to confiscate drugs. And that seems like a no-brainer. Like, I don't know if there's like not a legal way to do that without making it a crime.
I'm not sure that we're going to get into that level of detail on our state policy statement, but it could be part of a coalition effort. I mean,
yeah,
the truth is, you know, the city of Salem isn't going to get this thing fixed. It's going to be signing on with some coalition that we in general support, you know, their approach, which is a coalition like this. I haven't seen other coalitions yet working on it. I know there's the legislative committee, and then I know there's this coalition. I haven't seen anything come out of that committee yet to know where they're headed. So I think just having at this point a general policy statement that with the sentiments that we've articulated, and then as we get closer to seeing actual LCs and seeing actual bills, then we can start deciding yes, no on this, that, or the other thing. But that policy statement will give us this group the guidance we need in order to know which of those things that we have the council's support on or not. So
great. So I would just offer that in a track changes mode for the next time we all get together. And also just want to recognize that Councilor Nishioka submitted a couple of ideas as well to include. And so with your permission, I would also add something about mobile home park preservation. That issue is returning again to the fore. And then she's also noticed that there are additional airport investments than the particular investments that we're featuring on our list of priorities. So with your permission, I would just add more of the airport portfolio of opportunity.
Okay.
And I would again do all of that in track changes for your next meeting.
that sounds good. When is our next meeting?
I don't know.
December.
I'm sure we aim for the second and fourth Fridays, so I'm sure it's probably whatever that one is, the 8th or 15th.
The 8th or 15th. And then I know I'm extending this, and we've already achieved resolution, but like the fentanyl crisis is happening across the entire country. Like, this isn't unique to Oregon. And I feel like Measure 110 is like, oh, we wouldn't have a fentanyl crisis if it wasn't for Measure 110, and that's BS. Like, it's happening everywhere, like the opioid crisis happens everywhere. We might have been a little ahead of the curve on meth locally, but like it happens everywhere. This is not unique to us just because of Measure 110. And I'm not aware of any statistically significant data that even shows us that much of an outlier. So I just want to make sure that, you know, we're doing things that are data driven.
I hear you. The only other thought I had is I really want to underscore, I'd love to see if there are any other coalitions coming out with their thoughts on reforming Measure 110. I'd love to see them, not just from the treatment of mental health community, but also from the communities of color who tend to be disproportionately impacted by criminalization or decriminalization. So if I don't know what's out there, so I'm trusting Justin, Courtney, and anyone else who works in our legislative concepts to just at least bring it to our attention so we can decide what makes sense for us.
And this, again, I'm so sorry, but like, I care. So like, it's absurd that marijuana is still a Schedule I drug. I mean, I know it's not completely related to this, but like, marijuana is still a Schedule I drug. Fentanyl's a Schedule II drug. Cocaine is a Schedule II drug. I mean, these are things that like, oh my God, like if we were to make statements, I would want them included in the record as well.
That's a federal.
I understand, but like, it's a legislation, we have federal people here.
Your soapbox is acknowledged.
I appreciate it.
Courtney, does that push the, this topic coming to council into the first meeting in January, and is that enough time? Okay,
Yeah.
great, I just wanted to be clear on timing.
And that'll help us gather more information on direction.
Just by that time, there should
More
be.
people will have surfaced with their perspectives and opinions. It'll be easier for us to be responsive to your request for who else is saying what. So I think we're finished, but I want to make sure that you know what I think we're doing next.
Yep.
I think we are composing a letter around Orchard Park. I think we are composing a letter of support for the NOAA grant funding opportunity. We're preparing a letter of opposition, which is, that's what that sounds like, about the broadband issue that Ryan was speaking to. And we are preparing adjustment to the policy statements around Measure 110, mobile home park preservation, and airport terminal and other kinds of improvements. Would you like to have more conversation about the other scheduled drugs, or do you want us to try to do something with that?
It's a federal issue. I wish.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the rest of the group wants to do anything about that. I am interested in like saying it's absurd. I mean, we were one of the first states to, you know, legalize the use of marijuana, but I don't know if the rest of the group has to appetite for that.
I'm just not sure that it's worth our political energy.
Fair.
Not that I don't, because I completely agree with you. I'm just not sure that we can have an impact on that policy at this point because it's a federal issue.
Okay. So I think we have everything we need to be responsive to the requests, and we should be good. Is there anything else you would like to discuss?
I'm not going to be able to second you.
If Mark, if you have any adjustments based on what's currently happening about recreational immunity, I can add those in track changes so that we're covered to be able to respond to what we're seeing starting.
We won't get into it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.